Welcome back to Andersen Acres. Today we're going to make English muffin bread. This is a batter bread, so we're not going to be using the bread maker. This bread has a coarser but still light and fluffy texture that's kind of similar to English muffins. That's why it's called English muffin bread. So let's get started. We start with 2 cups, only 2 cups, of just regular flour, just your all-purpose flour or bread flour if you prefer. To that we're going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar. Mix that in, okay? Then we're going to do 1 teaspoon of salt. Give that a good mix. We are going to add 3 tablespoons of vegetable or canola oil, whichever you have on hand. The oil doesn't really make a difference in this particular recipe. Just don't use olive oil. It has too deep a flavor for this particular bread. Okay, next up we have 1 egg. Okay, so I'm going to crack my egg into a separate bowl first. There we go, just because sometimes I smash it up enough that the yolk gets broken, and we have some shells. We don't today. Good for us. So there's our 1 egg, and we're going to add 3/4 of a cup of warm water. Not hot water, but also not cold water, because we're going to put yeast in here in a minute, and we want that yeast to rise. Okay, so give that a quick stir just to make sure your egg is broken up. It doesn't have to be perfectly incorporated because we're about to add the yeast. There we go, that egg is broken up enough. Next up, we're going to add 1 heaping teaspoon of quick rise yeast. You can use bread machine if that's all you have. Don't use traditional yeast because it won't rise properly because we're not pre-dissolving the yeast. If you do want to use a traditional yeast in the batter breads, what you need to do is dissolve it in a warm liquid first. So you would warm up your water, add some of the sugar to that water, and then let that sit for 5 minutes. Then you would add that as the liquid to your bread. So there we go. That's our nice batter bread. You don't want to overmix your batter breads because we do not want this to have a super smooth texture. Okay, here we go. Very simple recipe. Now we're going to stick that aside to rise. It's going to take about an hour to double in size. It won't double in size the way a regular loaf does because it doesn't have the structure, but it'll fill out the bowl and come up a little bit. So you're not going to expect to see a giant mound like that. Instead, you're going to see it completely spread across the bowl. So put that aside for about an hour to rise. I'm going to put it in my microwave just because that's a warm, humid location, but you can cover it with a damp tea towel if you prefer. Just make sure you don't put it somewhere too cold or the yeast won't activate. So we'll come back in about an hour and see how risen it is. All right, so our batter has risen. See, it is full of air. Now we're just going to stir it up to get that air out. Now, I know it sounds counterproductive, but we really do want our air out. Okay, now we want to put our dough into our pan. I'm using a small round casserole dish because this one turns out really nice if you do it this way. Now, because this is not non-stick, you're going to want to spray a lot of cooking spray, or if you're using some butter and some flour, you're going to make sure that you do that very well. You don't want to miss any spots. This is a sticky dough. If you miss a spot, it's going to stick. Next up, we are going to need some cornmeal because this is English muffin bread. So if you don't use cornmeal, it's not quite English muffiny. So you need enough, and you want to do the sides, sprinkle the sides with it as well. Okay, so you want to get your sides and you want to get your bottom. Okay, so you don't want to miss any spots because it will stick. It's very, very sticky dough. Okay, now we want to get a spatula, one of our silicone ones that we use quite frequently, because that's what we're going to use to put the dough into that pan. So let's use that to scrape that wooden spoon off because we do not need the wooden spoon anymore. We're done with that. We're just going to use this to scrape all our dough into our casserole dish. Okay, here we go. Just want to use that to loosen it. I like using a silicone spatula because it doesn't stick. So now you're not going to do anything with this dough. You're just going to pour it in. You're not going to flip it. You're just going to pour it in. You're not going to do anything because it's already sunk down into the cornmeal. If we start playing with it now, we're going to disturb the cornmeal on the bottom. So that's all you do. You just pour it in there, you let it do its thing, you do not even push it down. Don't touch it. Just leave it like that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set that aside to rise for probably 90 minutes. You do have to be patient with batter bread sometimes. So we'll come back in about 90 minutes and hopefully we'll be ready to bake it. All right, so there it is, all nice and risen. I don't want to tip it too much because it is a more liquid dough. It'll flow from one side or the other. So we're just going to leave it like that. You're going to preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. When it is fully preheated, you'll pop this in the oven for about 30 minutes, maybe 35. You do want it nice golden brown on the top, and you do want it to sound hollow when you tap it. So that'll take 30 to 35 minutes. So we will come back in about half an hour and see how our bread looks. All right, so here's our English muffin bread. It is done. It came out of the oven at the 30-minute mark exactly. It has been cooling for 10 minutes. So yes, this pan is still a little hot. So yes, I'm burning my fingers a wee bit, but that's what it looks like. You notice it has pulled away from the sides, so you can tell that it's done. You could also tell that it's done when I took it out of the oven. I was tapping it to make sure that it sounded hollow. Once it's cooled for 10 minutes, it won't sound hollow when you tap it anymore. So we're just going to take this out. It just comes out really easy because, because we used the spray and the cornmeal, and that's how it looks. And it looks actually like kind of like a giant English muffin, and it will be delicious once we cut it. You don't have to wait for it to cool longer than 10 minutes to cut it. You can absolutely cut it now if you wanted to. I'm not going to yet because I'm kind of saving this for when my kids get home, and they're not home yet. So you can cut it whenever you like. It makes a great toast. It has kind of the texture of an English muffin, and it is just all around delicious, and it doesn't take as long to make as real English muffins. So that's it for us today at Andersen Acres. Hope you make this at home by yourself. We'll see you tomorrow.